You'd think $20 can't change a life. But it did. $20 passed hands between me and a man with rough palms. And in the exchange, he handed me the only thing that would save my life. A truth I never wanted to hear. I remember the day like a wound that's hard to forget. The sunlight was thin and careful that morning. The kind of light that makes dust look like little drifting islands. The house hummed with its usual sounds, the kettle on the stove, the clock over the mantel, the distant radio playing an old tune I knew by heart. It should have been ordinary. It wasn't. My housekeeper, Samir, had worked for me off and on for years. A quiet man with a permanent crease in his forehead from worrying. He always arrived early and left late, taking on the small jobs I could no longer do, hauling bags from the market, sweeping the garden, putting that stubborn light in the hallway back in place. I paid him a little more than fair because I'd been raised to pay kindness forward. We had a simple arrangement. He helped keep my life together, and I paid him for it. That morning he came in looking ashen. He set down the sack of groceries and tried to speak. But the words tripped over one another and fell silent. "Samir," I asked. He glanced at the kitchen clock, then at me, and his mouth folded into something like a confession. "Madam," he said, bowing slightly the way he always did, "I am sorry. I must tell you something." I did not know how to bring it up. He sat, and for a second I thought he was going to tell me he had broken something, or that the roof had a leak. Small things happen when you're old. Pain is seldom dramatic. This was different. "You gave me $20 last week," he said suddenly. I blinked. "Yes, for the extra hours." I thought it was nothing. He nodded. "You gave me more than money. You gave me courage," he murmured. And that is how he told me the thing that would chill me to the bone. "Your daughter-in-law, she comes here when you are asleep." He spat the words like something bitter. "She and Mr. Daniel talk in hushed voices in the night. I heard them say terrible things." He swallowed. "They are planning to make your life end. She said you are an obstacle." The room spun a little. I pressed my palm to the porcelain mug in my hand until the warmth steadied my fingers. I only wanted the coffee to be hot. Instead, I felt the ground fall away. It is astonishing how quickly normalness can become danger. For 3 decades, I had trusted the faces I ate with at my table. My son, my boy, who used to build toy cars on the kitchen floor, my daughter-in-law who smiled at family dinners, who called me mama in a warm voice and once pressed my hand like a promise. I had never imagined the two of them plotting anything against me. "Are you certain?" I asked because the story felt like something that should have been spoken by a child with a bad joke. But Samir's eyes did not joke. For a long time after he left, I sat at the kitchen table in the same place. I had cut 1,000 loaves of bread. The radio hummed, but I could not hear the music. I tried to summon the reason, to find the fault in this story. Sometimes people embroider their loneliness into melodrama. But I had seen my son's face in the last months, the way he had grown a little more distant, the way a new stubbornness had settled under his jaw. A seed of unease sprouted inside me. That day the house felt like a stranger. Every photograph lined on the mantel, every faded card in the drawer, every small dent at the edge of the table that had been made by my husband's careless elbow, all of it seemed to watch me with accusing eyes. I thought of my late husband and his hands, the way he used to rub my shoulders on cold evenings and say with a grin, "We've done well with the life we made." I had believed, with all the fierceness a woman can have, that our love would keep the family safe. I had been wrong. I did not act in the way some might imagine. I did not storm into my son's bedroom demanding details that night. Nor did I call the police and set in motion a wheel of investigation that might sweep away my family. The truth had to be handled like glass, with caution, with a steady and careful hand. I had to know for sure before I moved. Accusations are a kind of weapon. They either wound and heal, or they shatter what little trust remains. So I began to watch. Not in the obvious way, with binoculars or hidden cameras. But with the old method, attention, listening to small rhythms, reading the quiet codes of a household. I pretended to sleep when they spoke in low voices downstairs. I pretended to be clumsy and forgetful when something fell near me, or feigned a cough so I could be present without being noticed. You learn to listen when you have been ignored a long time. You learn to read the way wind shifts leaves and know where a storm is. And in the noticing, I found the pattern: late night walks together to the back garden, hushed messages that blinked and were deleted, a wallet that seemed to appear for a single payment, then vanish. I began to collect a private ledger in my head of small things that, when taken together, felt like footsteps toward a real danger. There is an old proverb in my village: the best weapon is the one you hide until you must use it. So I put on an armor of ordinary things: the gentle smile, the question about dinner, the small attentions that make one a good mother, not a vigilant novice. I made tea and put biscuits on a plate where everyone would see them. I hummed the lullabies I had once sung to my son, loud enough that anyone listening would be reminded that this was my home and these were our songs. I did not want them to think me frantic. Panic gives people the advantage. All the while I did the practical things I taught myself to do over a life of small emergencies. I found the spare key behind the loose stone near the back gate. I found the old hidden envelope of cash my husband and I had squirreled away years ago in times of need. I wrote the important phone numbers in a small notebook, the ones I might need if I had to step beyond the house and call for help. I dusted off a friend's number in the next town. A woman named Lena, who still owed me a favor from the days wed, shared a late-night hospital vigil. I set aside clothing in a neat bag in the bottom of my wardrobe in case I needed to leave quickly. This was not panic. It was planning. It took me nearly a week before I had the proof I needed. On a wet Thursday evening, when the sky darkened the way it darkens before something breaks, my son heaved a sigh and said to his wife in the kitchen, loud enough for me to hear when I pretended to fetch sugar, "We should do it before she notices." Her voice was quick, too casual, as if speech was a thing you could make light like breadcrumbs. A small voice inside me clenched. I turned the kettle off and walked toward the doorway with a steadiness I did not feel. It was time to decide which road I would walk. I could have called everyone, then the police, the clinic, anyone who might rush in with officialness and clip the edges of the problem with the blunt instrument of law. But I knew something else. I knew my boy's face when he had shame or fear, and how quick he was to anger when cornered. I wanted an end that would not only stop their plan, if there was one, but would also lay bare their conspiracy to everyone they cared for. Public exposure can be a strong medicine for hiding things. Shame, when precise, forces conversation. It is ugly, but it speaks truth to those who believe in polite silence. So I crafted a plan that would not put me in their hands again. It was not violent. It did not employ threats. It used patience, the law, and the surprising power of witnesses. First, I recorded it. Not with a device that would startle them if found, but with the old, reliable pen and memory. I wrote down the time, the exact words, who was with them. And then I found a second witness, Samir. He was reluctant at first, true to form. But once I told him what I heard, his face went white and he agreed to stay and keep his eyes open and be ready to testify if needed. He came with the sincerity of someone whose hunger for rightness matched mine. Next, I reached out to Lena, the old friend in the next town. She arrived the following morning, with the quiet deficiency of someone who had learned the value of being helpful without being theatrical. She brought the right way. That phrase calmed me. It meant evidence, witnesses, and a steady hand. It meant we would go to the bank and to the lawyer before we ratcheted the story into the world. Sometimes, people who plan wrongs expect to be clever. The law, moving slowly as it does, moves with a quiet, teeth-and-bone logic that can catch the clever off guard. It was time to let that logic work. We set a date for a family dinner, everyone present. Everyone thinking the night would be ordinary. I cooked a meal and set the table carefully. 4 appearances are a kind of instrument to. At the table we spoke of small things. The weather, the neighbor's new dog, the child's recital next week. I watched them eat and speak and thought of the years that had gone into the quiet shaping of this family. Snatches of bridal showers, diapers changed in the wee hours, the way my son used to fall asleep against my shoulder. I did not want any of that to be hollowed unnecessarily. But truth, I told myself, has a way of healing or cutting. And I preferred healing that happened from a clean start. When dessert came, a tart I had caramelized gently, the edges crisped to a sweet brown, the lawyer walked in. He had been invited under the pretense of signing some mundane papers I had been meaning to update. He sat at my left, a quiet, measured presence, and when the room had settled, I stood up. Anyone watching would have seen only a woman clearing plates and making polite gesture. What they did not see were the files in my bag. The copies of text messages I had carefully preserved. The notes from Samir, the small but precise ledger of conversations. I placed the papers on the table, like a card on a table of truth. It is a peculiar thing to watch your family's secrets unspool in the light. First, there is surprise. Then there is denial. Denial ripples into anger, and anger, when it has pride for fuel, becomes a spectacle. My son squinted at the paper. His wife's face hardened. For a second I thought she might strike the table. Then she laughed, the brittle laugh of someone trying to weaponize disdain. "This is ridiculous," she said. "What are you playing at, Mother?" If she had been clever, she might have stopped there and left with poisoned indignation. She did not. That night she did what frightened people do when they are cornered. They speak faster and reveal more than they planned. The things she said, the ease with which she mentioned a neighbor's name, the offhand comment about making arrangements, all became threads that let the truth show through. The lawyer, patient and unflinching, explained the gravity of what had been told. He moved like someone cataloging an illness and deciding a course of treatment. Calls would be made, statements would be taken, and there would be an offer for mediation in the presence of professional counselors. If the family wanted to attempt to heal. He also explained the protective steps I could take, temporary restraining orders, switching the locks if needed, involving the authorities if any immediate danger existed. Under the weight of witnesses and legal logic, my son's face crumpled. The proud, abrupt man who had once laughed heartily at my jokes shrank. He stammered at first, then blurted half explanation. It was talk. He said a word meant to soften something worse. We weren't serious. We were angry. It was just talk. But when your words become the basis for plotting harm, talk is not harmless. Talk is a line drawn in the sand. I had learned that the hard way. Words matter because they shape actions. The next days were a blur of formality. There were police visits. There were questions asked by officials who looked like they were reading a script for a life they had not expected. There were quiet discussions with a social worker who asked me about my feelings and offered me resources. In the middle of all of that, in the hallways of my home, as people shuffled in and out with clipboards, my son found a way to speak to me in the corners where conversations are forced into the soft light of shame. He asked for forgiveness. He said he had been angry about debts, about expectations, about feeling trapped in his own grown-up world. He said his wife had been whispering to him about a quick solution, about how easy it would be to be rid of an old obligation. You cannot understand the acid of those words unless you have held the hand of someone you love and felt them tremble with complicity. My chest ached, not with revenge, but with a sorrow that had the bone of a knife in it. And then something happened that proved the old proverb right. Sometimes the best weapon truly is the one you keep until the time is right. When the authorities interviewed my son and his wife with the seriousness such things demand, The cracks widened. Under pressure, fear makes people forget their stories. Small lies tangle. They trip over each other. They contradicted themselves in ways the officials noticed. The lawyer had ensured the chain of custody for evidence was sound. Samir provided his witness statement. Lena signed her name and offered to testify about my character as a single woman raising a family in hard times. There was an incontrovertible weight of community memory and law behind me. In the end, the real victory was not a dramatic incarceration or a movie-style confrontation. It was the simple, inevitable unmasking. Neighbors began to look at them differently. Friends withdrew invitations. My son's job was at risk for the very instability his home life had begun to show. There were consequences that flowed from truth, some legal, some social, and some internal and private. My son had to face the mirror of what he had almost done. I did not savor their shame. I never wanted blood for the satisfaction of it. My aim was safety and restoration of peace for myself, and for the innocence of those vulnerable in the world. The humiliation that came to them was a byproduct, not the goal. I do not delight in other people's suffering. I delight in my own survival. After the hearings and the long, small repairs to the emotional fabric of our family, something like daylight returned. My son, shrunken in ways I could not stand to watch often, began to see the world with a new humility. He sought counseling. He apologized in words that shook. Whether this apology becomes a steady change is not for me to declare. It is a path he will have to walk alone. As for the daughter-in-law, she left town soon after, a carriage of pride and regret. Rumors swirl around such exits, and people will talk and make up details to justify their own curious minds. I would not be the woman to stoke gossip. The point was this: I had chosen truth, and truth had chosen the light. The house felt different after all that. It felt safer, yes, but in a quiet way. The radio filled the air with music again. I put flowers by the window. I started to bake bread the way I once had. The smell of yeast and oven warming the rooms like apology and promise. Sometimes I would sit at the kitchen table and think of the small coin of $20. I had handed a helpful man. I had thought it was just small kindness. It became the key that opened a locked door. It reminded me of something older than both of us. That ordinary acts can have extraordinary consequences, and that in the small mercies we offer, sometimes we secure a lifeline. In the end, I did not want revenge for. If you ask me what the moral is, I will tell you what my mother told me. You do not have to be loud to be brave. You do not have to be young to be clever. Sometimes, you simply have to be willing to listen when a stranger speaks the truth, and then to use that truth the way a gardener uses rain to make something grow where there was almost only withering. $20, that morning, bought me the courage to act. But in the end, it was not the money. It was the whole life I would not surrender. This is how I stopped a danger that could have been so quiet no one noticed until it was too late. This is how I turned a small kindness into survival and walked forward with my dignity intact.